Okay, wonderful. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Pani and I'm the Northern California ACC Fit Catalyst.
And I'm Megan. I'm the Southern California Fit Catalyst.
We would like to thank you for joining our financial planning session today. We'd like to start by thanking our wonderful California ACC team, President Dr. Jamal Rana, Vice President Dr. Hilliard, and our fantastic CEO, Leanna Collins, for their continued unwavering support of the FITs and for making this event possible today. Megan and I, along with our California ACC Fit Committee, are extremely excited to be able to bring this session to you today. As you are all aware, as medical professionals, we receive very little to no training on financial planning throughout med school and residency and fellowship. So it's definitely an area that we lack expertise and can benefit from some guidance and support. So it's our honor to be joined by Brian Volpe today, who's a certified financial planner and senior vice president for Morgan Stanley. He began his career in the financial services industry in 2011 and joined Morgan Stanley in 2014, forming the Cox-Hoffman-Volpe Group. And his primary focus is the execution of client financial plans by implementing investment solutions, allowing his clients to achieve their goals. So we will start our session today with a background presentation, follow that by some moderated questions by Megan and myself, and then open the forum to a live Q&A session by you all. So please make sure to send your questions our way in the chat so we can address them at the end of the presentation. And just so you know, this session will be recorded and will be available for further viewing on the California ACC Fit website. So without further ado, Brian, take it away.
Great, thanks, Pani and Megan and Leanna. Good evening, everyone, for those viewing tonight as well as in the future. Like Pani said, my name's Brian, began my career in 2011. I will be sharing my screen here in a sec, but just a little bit of background. Like Pani said, so I'm a certified financial planner as well as my partners. So a lot of people, when they hear about Morgan Stanley, they probably think, oh, investment in stocks, bonds, etc. We really do put the cart in front of the horse. So we focus a lot on financial planning. Our team, we have 3 financial advisors. We manage just about $1 billion or so in assets. After the market we've had this year, maybe a little less, but that fluctuates. So anyways, I've had the opportunity over my career to work with lots of physicians, which is quite honestly one of my favorite things in my job. I feel like I get to pick their brain, and hopefully my health is a result of the advice that my clients give me. So certainly over the course of the past few years during COVID, it was nice because our clients range from, infectious disease specialists to generalists or internists, surgeons, and plastic surgeons. So lots of referral sources. But anyways, love what we get to do, and I think tonight what we'll focus on in part of our practice, we've actually had the opportunity to work with young athletes as well, and I think that's a very different type of client versus a traditional Morgan Stanley client, as well as young physicians. There's the issues you're facing or the things that you're trying to accomplish are a lot different than, say, someone with an established practice who's maybe looking to transition or sell their practice or whatever the case may be. So I think tonight's not going to be a conversation about stocks, bonds, and all that stuff. Although it can go that direction if you guys prefer, but I think what we'll focus on is, and based on some of the early questions I got, maybe just focus on some basic general financial planning principles, and then we can kind of get more specific and expand on some of those ideas as we progress. Anything else right off the bat, or am I good to share my screen, Pani? Okay, here we go. All right, bear with me, guys. All right. I was telling Pani and Megan, our industry is probably only second to yours in terms of regulation. So some of these slides might be pretty boring, but we'll suffer through them together. And like I said, kind of build off, some of the questions, or excuse me, some of the content. So I think, this slide, I actually got to give Morgan Stanley credit. I kind of liked, because in talking to Leanna, it seems like this is maybe what is kind of going on in, some of your minds, right? Clearly, you are all experts and specialists in your field, but then you have kind of these lingering questions, right? Okay, so I've been a student for a very long time. I have substantial debt. Okay, now I'm starting to make money. Oh, I find out that I have to pay the federal government 50% of everything I make. Do I start saving for a house? Do I start putting money in a retirement plan, right? And there's just a lot of things that come at you. I think early in my career, I was referred to a doctor, and I was shared this story with Leanna. So he was an internist and was saddled with a ton of student debt. His wife was a dental student at the time, so she had a lot of debt. And George made quite a bit of money, right? He was young, in his early 30s, and he was making, high six figures, right? But he came to me and he said, "Hey, Brian, I don't understand. I'm making, $400,000, and yet half of that is going to the government. I feel like I'm just scraping by. What do I do? This doesn't seem right, right?" And so one of the things we did with George, right, was help him kind of identify, prioritize the goals. But then it eventually led into some very tax advantage savings plans, right, through self-employment retirement plans that effectively let him put a lot of money away pre-tax, right? So effectively paying himself instead of the federal government. So when Leanna kind of shared with me what the audience was, I immediately thought of Dr. Chen, and I was like, wow, yeah, that's, I think quite honestly what you guys are facing. So we're going to kind of bring it back, get very basic. Again, we can talk about what some of those retirement plans look like, but I think for now, let's start with some of the basics. So, we're really big, again, kind of a cookie cutter slide, but yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a good message here. What are your goals, right? Because at the end of the day, some people hate going to bed at night knowing they have debt, right? Other people don't mind it, right? And they're okay carrying a large debt, so long as they're pursuing maybe other goals or other passions. So I think where it really starts is saying, okay, what is it that I'm trying to achieve? Do I want to own a home? Am I in a market that owning a home is really possible, right? Am I trying to start my own practice? And if I am starting to, if I'm looking to start my own practice, what's the ramp up time look like? Some of you, I assume, have families, right? So how does that balance in? So I think this is just a really good time, right, as you transition to step back and say, hey, what is it I want to do? What's most important to me? Because that'll kind of frame some of those questions you might have around what to do with your cash or your cash flow. So this is a very generic, slide here, but again, it's like, okay, so maybe short term, you're looking to buy a new car, or you have a wedding or whatever. Medium term, you want to pay off debt. Long term, retirement, right? And I do think that's a good exercise. I mean, even personally, I have my short term goals, right, and my medium and long term. And the bottom line is those are important, right, because they really do help frame your decisions. I mean, I'm a big believer in, having a roadmap. If you don't have a roadmap, right, you're never going to get to where you're going. So let's talk a little bit about cash flow and what you do with it. I mean, how do you achieve these goals, right? Again, when you go back to a slide like this, what do I do with my money, right? And a lot of people say, well, create a budget. But I actually think that's not the first step. And in working with the athletes, one of the phrases that we used a lot was figure out your patterns of spending, right? The like American Express or Visa or whatever, they make it very easy these days to track your spending. Okay, so don't sit here on an Excel spreadsheet and say, oh, I'm going to spend this on this. Like, look at what you're spending now, right? And that's how I started, even personally, and said, okay, well, I noticed habitually I spend about this much a month over here, and that's right. And then you start to identify what those patterns are. And I think, as you guys grow in your careers, and this is a big thing that we ran into with the athletes, it's important you understand your patterns of spending, because as you start making more money, right, you want to see how are those patterns of spending impacted. So the most standard rule out there, right, is the more money you make, the more money you spend. And what you want to avoid is having your expenses go up in proportion to your income, right? So if you have an idea of kind of where those patterns are, you'll start to kind of see fluctuation. And ironically, this is kind of what they have here as number 2. I mean, so calculating your income, obviously, I think, you guys will be able to handle that. Tracking your expenses, like we say, we call that patterns of spending. And then they say, separating your needs from your wants, setting your budget, and then monitoring. I mean, pretty straightforward stuff. But again, I think what it comes down to for us is when you set that budget, there's a lot of stuff out there. I actually think it was Elizabeth Warren coined a 50-30-20, which was 50 your needs, 30 your wants, 20 your savings. And that's fine. For me, the way that we like to break it down is what's your essential living and what's your discretionary living, right? Clearly your discretion is where you have some wiggle room. But again, until you understand what those patterns of spending are, it's very hard to know what you can cut out. And then where I like to go after you have an idea of what your patterns are, set ratios. Right. And again, you can go online and you can see what your ratios ought to be. But quite honestly, everyone's situation is different. So I think, the way that I even do it personally is I set my own ratios. Right. I mean, your ratios. And again, guys, when I say ratios, I'm talking about what percentage goes to housing, what percentage goes to your saving, what percentage goes to your entertainment, et cetera. Right. So, if you're living, I think Pani said you were up in Northern California, right? So if you're up in Northern California, your housing ratio is probably going to look a little different than if someone's living in, middle America, which is where I went to school, right? So in Minnesota. So I think it's understanding like, hey, I'm not going to put an arbitrary 10% of my housing if I'm living in Palo Alto or whatever, right? So, but like I say, figure out what your ratios are, because inevitably in your career, I would suspect you start to make more money, right? And if you keep your ratios the same, the more money you make, the more money you'll save, right? The more money you'll have for your entertainment, et cetera. But that's the best way, again, working with young athletes, we found it was like, okay, so you get an entry-level contract. And a lot of guys said, well, you know what, I'm not making that much money right now, so I'm just going to spend it all. And then once I start making 7 figures, well, then I'll start saving. But the problem was we found is their patterns of spending were already kind of ingrained in themselves, right? So, if they were making a few $100,000 and spending it, when they started making a few million, they spent it, right? So, again, figure out what your ratios are. And then when you're making a few $100,000, maybe, it's not a ton of money being saved, but then you stick with those ratios over time, and that prevents you from, effectively having your expenses increase pro rata with your income. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, like I say, my wife knows I'm big in our ratios. I always say, hey, we want to take more vacations. It's simple. All we got to do is, make more money, right? So the next thing, again, that I'm a big believer in, and I have to, I guess, agree with Morgan Stanley, pay yourself first, right? I mean, cut yourself that first paycheck every month. You've heard it. I mean, I'm not probably the first person that has told you that. But certainly, your future self will thank you. Taking advantage of tax benefits, I think certainly that goes in conjunction with paying yourself as young doctors. And again, everyone's going to be in a different situation. I'm going to pick on Pani because, I know most about her in the 5 minutes we had before this call. But, if you're working for, Kaiser, for instance, right, that's going to mean something a lot different than if you're solo practice. Your tax advantages are going to be a lot more limited in a certain sense when you're a W-2 versus if you set up, XYZ cardiology, you're an LLC and you're writing everything off. But again, we can talk a little bit more about that later. Clearly, I don't have to tell you this. I'm sure you guys understand how compounding works, saving now versus later. I mean, clearly there's tremendous advantages in terms of, compound interest. And there's a slide on that, which I think we'll skip over, but it does speak to that, right? The money you save early on has a substantial, bigger impact in terms of compounding. Something in terms of a framework, I thought this made a lot of sense. And this kind of goes in conjunction with paying yourself. You guys all have checking accounts, you all have cash accounts, you get it. But certainly keeping 1 to 2 months living expenses in there makes some sense. You'll see a lot of people that have, cash and they just let it sit in their cash account, right? Or their checking account. Certainly, I mean, at least we think there's some inefficiencies there. So it says once you're kind of cash flowing, which you all are doing, I'm sure, right? Well, then you get your savings account. You've probably had these since, you're 5 years old, right? Savings account, again, we like 6 months living expenses there. Again, everyone's situation is different. If you're working, again, I'll be picking on Pawnee all night, but if you're working at Kaiser and there's a lot of stability there, right? Maybe you can get away with a little less. One of our clients is an anesthesiologist. He ran an anesthesiology practice with, I don't know, 60 or 70 anesthesiologists, right? He's actually since transitioned and now has built all these infusion clinics, which is interesting to me. But anyways, he always jokes. He says, hey, look, I'm the wild card, right? Like I ran the business. I had these infusion clinic, whatever. My wife worked for Kaiser. She was the stable one, right? That we could really kind of count on. So again, tailor this to what makes sense for you, right? I mean, if you're going to be, kind of in private practice and, your own boss, maybe you want to increase that to 12 months, right, of living expenses in your savings account. Once you have that, okay, once you have the, the cash account, the savings account, then it's time to, have some sort of investment account. And what I would say to that is, again, in conjunction with paying yourself, this investment account, right, this is now where you build your net worth. And there's a couple ways you build your net worth, as you guys know, right? You're either increasing your assets or you're lowering your liabilities. Which one do you do first? Well, I mean, it's kind of up to you. We have, like I say, I mean, a lot of clients, and we have certain clients that just can't stand debt, right? So for them, they don't like going to bed at night knowing they have the debt. So they really want to make sure that they're doing everything they can to, pay off that debt. We have other clients that say, hey, look, I have debt at, 3, 4, 5%. I'm able to go out there, right, and generate a return in excess of that, right? So effectively, I'm making a spread on someone else's money. So what works for you? Again, that's really something that, you have to ask yourselves. Like I say, I mean, we have one of our clients, he's a nephrologist. I don't, I'd be curious. I mean, I assume you guys know what nephrologists are. You're all doctors. I know when I started working with him, I certainly did not. But anyways, he's a nephrologist by trade, but actually what he does is he builds dialysis centers. And so his return on capital is far in excess of money he borrows. So he's not really worried about that, right? So again, it's really asking yourself what you're comfortable with. The thing that, the caveat there that I would say is, okay, well, if you really want to pay off the debt, that's fine. But let's not miss out on maybe some of these tax advantage savings vehicles that'll help kind of shift some money into your pocket, right? And getting the tax deduction while doing it. Okay. Um, let's see what else we have in terms of slides. Yeah, I don't think, well, this is just, again, for those that are married, but I think we'll skip over that. Yeah, and then, Leanna did mention there's always the question about the home. I think we'll, use this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about working versus non-working assets. One of the challenges when, you're a young professional and, you're maybe instantly put into, the top 1% or 5% of income earners, right, is, you want to start buying stuff, right? Whether those are cars or boats or houses or whatever, right? So you have to understand kind of what are working assets versus non-working assets. I mean, this is Southern California, so I mean, or at least I'm in Southern California, so I get the question all the time of like, hey, my net worth is, $4 million. It's like, okay, well, what's your house worth? I don't know, $3 million. It's like, well, you want to sell your house? No, I love my house. It's like, well, okay, you can't retire, right? I mean, because you're living in your assets. So there's working assets, which quite simply, I mean, I would define as assets that pay you, right? And then you have your non-working assets, which are assets that you pay. So, okay, your house, right? Well, wait, I own my house. I own my house outright. I don't have a mortgage. Well, I mean, you still pay property taxes. You still pay maintenance, right? You still pay utilities. So, and if anybody owns a house that's watching this call, right? I mean, you're always doing something to it, right? Doesn't matter. So your house is never going to cut you a paycheck unless you actually go out and rent your house, right? Presumably you're not living in it, but again, at that point, it is now a working asset, again, an asset that you pay. So your cars, I mean, how I would explain it to these young athletes, I mean, basically, I mean, any quote unquote sexy asset, right? That's usually a, non-working asset. Looks good, feels good, but isn't really helping you hit your long-term goals. There's a place for them. And the ratio that we use, and this is important, we always are sharing this with clients, is 2/3, 1/3. If you have about 2/3 of your assets working and about 1/3 non-working, you can usually generate enough passive income or cash flow to retire or supplement or whatever the case may be. So, as young professionals, those ratios are going to be skewed. I mean, they just are, because maybe you're going to want to buy a house, right? Or you're dealing with a large amount of student debt. I mean, either way, what I'm getting at, you just want to be working towards that 2/3, 1/3. Okay. And like I say, that's very sustainable. A lot of people in California, unfortunately, are flip-flopped, right? Because housing is crazy. Which is why I think California had, the largest number of one-way tickets ever, over the past couple of years, right? People are moving, they're cashing in equity from their home and living somewhere else cheaper, right? Because they need that equity. So anyways, I think, in terms of what we have on buying the house, is pretty cookie cutter. I mean, I think this is really no surprise probably to anyone on this call. The people that are probably on this call, represent, the lowest percentage of homeowners in the United States, right? And again, that's because the barriers of entry are so high. The question you get a lot is, well, should I take on more mortgage debt when I have all this student debt? Again, it's really a question for you. I mean, are you comfortable with that? I mean, remember with rent, right? I mean, the way that I look at a mortgage or a house, the average person is not staying in their home for 30 years, right? The average person stays in their home in the US for about 7 years. In California, it's about 5 years, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means that your mortgage effectively is, tax deductible rent. So if you can come up with a down payment, or you can come up with a way to maybe, creatively finance it. Yeah, I mean, despite your student debt, owning a home probably makes some sense, right? Because there's some significant tax benefits for doing it. And we're always very careful when we talk about leverage. Just gotta make sure my headphones don't die on me. So, so what did I just say? So 30-year mortgage, a lot of people get the 30-year mortgage, right? But the average stay in a home is 5 years to 7 years. Well, maybe you rethink the 30-year mortgage, right? I mean, if you can get a shorter adjustable rate mortgages and you're young, and it helps you on your cash flow side. Again, you got to live somewhere. So if it's me, and you can, save for a down payment, and you can work towards that goal, I wouldn't let your student debt be a deterrent for owning a home. In fact, quite the opposite. Okay. It's tax deductible, it's secured by your house, it's very low interest rate, et cetera. So anyways, I think we'll probably table the house talk unless there's other specific questions as we go along. The example Morgan Stanley gave is pretty horrific. If you can find a house for $200,000, I think primarily people here are in California. So that's obviously a challenge, but it's just going to show you the idea that, your interest is deductible, which, your taxes are deductible, although it's capped now to 10,000. But anyways, the rest of my just prepared remarks are, more of what it looks like working with a financial advisor. But I think there were some questions on that. So that gets us to, about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. I think at this point, why don't we see what specific questions there were, and, kind of take it from there.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. That was very informative. And like we were talking about earlier, we don't get a lot of exposure to this in medical school or residency. So this was definitely very helpful. Our first question deals with disability insurance. So it's a two-part question. Who should buy it, what to buy, and when? And the follow-up to that is, are there plans to help those pursuing procedural specialties, such as interventional EP, where there is something in place that they can't practice the procedural aspect anymore, but still want to do the general non-invasive part of cardiology?
Yeah. So I think I stopped sharing the screen, do you think, or do we need this?
Whichever you prefer.
Okay. Yeah, so I should probably use this opportunity just to say, in case, I'm not a tax advisor. I'm not an estate attorney. We just raise our hand on different things with our experience in working with our clients, but we always say, we're just part of your team, and, you should definitely consult those experts also. In regards to disability insurance, I will say, I was actually really happy to see that question. I can't stress how critical it is. And just to be clear, I am not a disability expert, but I will tell you, anytime we're doing a financial plan for someone, we are asking them a question of, what does your long-term disability look like? And they usually say, oh, I think that's something I get through my employer. It's like, well, usually not. Usually you have to opt in for it. Usually you get short-term disability, right? And short-term disability is covering you for, 3 to 6 months, 60 to 80% of your pay. In your guys' case, to answer the question more specifically, who should get disability? I think that was part one. I mean, really everyone. Okay. You are, not any of you specifically, but anyone is far more likely to collect on disability versus life insurance, right? So life insurance gets talked about all the time. Disability does not. So, I think, again, you have to kind of see, I can tell you, Kaiser, they offer disability, right? And they offer long-term disability. But what you have to then ask yourself the question is, well, what type of long-term disability do they offer? And this is kind of where the very specific parts of the insurance contracts get in. So, and I just want to make sure I address all those questions. So who should get it? Every single one of you should have long-term disability. Short-term probably comes, complimentary. There's really only, and again, I'm not 100% sure on this, but there aren't that many companies that offer your own occupation disability. So there's a couple different types. Let me back up. There's a couple different types of disability, and I think long-term disability. And I think this gets to that second part of the question, Megan, is, there's own occupation and any occupation long-term disability. Like what I have, what most, and this is kind of what you'd want to investigate with a company like Kaiser, right? Is typically long-term disability is going to be any occupation, right? So we eat our own cooking, so to speak. So I have long-term disability, but I know ours is any occupation. So it's like if I'm disabled, right? I will collect my long-term disability until I'm age 65 or 67. But to the extent that I can get another job that meets the standard of my education and experience, I lose my disability, right? So that is any occupation versus own occupation. And again, you guys are, as I understand, right? I mean, highly specialized in what you can do, right? So if you are relying on your hands, if you're a surgeon, or if you're relying on dexterity for these, non-invasive procedures, right? As a cardiologist, and you have any occupation, okay, well, something happens to your hand and you can no longer perform these non-invasive procedures, but you can serve as a urgent care doc making half. You're kind of out of luck, right? You're not going to qualify for disability because you can work as a doctor doing something else. So what you guys really want to look at is own occupation, long-term disability. And what I was getting at, and I kind of went in reverse, there's only 6 companies, there's only a handful, I don't know the exact amount, that offer own occupation. So even if you're working with Kaiser and they have long-term disability, or any big medical group, you still might want to go out there and say, okay, well, do I want to supplement what I currently get with my own occupation? Which the way that own occupation works, as I understand it, is you will be given, let's, in that example, I can't use my right hand, I can't perform these procedures. I will be given my disability benefit, regardless if I can still work in the practice as a consultant or whatever, right? Or if you want to go become a realtor or do something else, right? You're still going to collect your long-term disability benefit. So I really, hopefully I've made that, or I've really stressed how critical it is for you guys. I would not, like I say, it's critical for everyone because we all have that risk. But for a highly specialized part of medicine, it would be, in my opinion, not prudent to practice without it. And like I say, probably really opting into some type of own occupation. And then I will just say that landscape with disability, as with all insurance, it's very complicated. You want to make sure you're working with someone that you trust that can kind of make it clear, right? But there's kind of hybrid policies, I believe, where you can do like I think they call it transitional occupation, where it's like, okay, we'll pay you the difference, right? So if you can work as an urgent care doc making $10,000 a month, but then you were making 20, right? Well, we'll pay you the 10, you won't get the full 20. You with me? So there's lots of different policies, but just to make it clear, you should definitely get it. And the procedural specialties, some of this is over my head, like interventional EP. I suspect that's highly specialized, right? Okay. So those types of folks are really going to want to focus on own occupation. Any follow-ups there? Do you think that properly addressed that question?
No, I think you got the question. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So the next question is, what do you think is the best time for us to get involved with a financial advisor? Would it be during training or as an early career, or maybe later on when we're more established?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say, what got me into this business, I always tell people if I wasn't a financial advisor, I'd be teaching or coaching. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I enjoy doing. As doctors, you might feel that same way. And so my favorite part of what I get to do is, things like this, right? Just helping people understand the landscape, helping people understand, what things could potentially, be a landmine, right? So not all of us have that same passion. I mean, it's what it interests me. The challenge I think that you're facing in working with a financial advisor, maybe you've heard of something like this, right? But is, the question I always get is, well, what's your minimum, right? What's your minimum? And I hate that question because, like I said, we manage about $1 billion in assets, and we have 4 criteria for a client, right? They have to have some money because, I mean, we can't work with someone that doesn't have any money, right? Number 2 is they have to be nice. I mean, life's too short, right, to work with people that aren't nice. Okay. They have to listen to us, right? I mean, you guys can relate. If you have a patient that doesn't listen to you, forget it. What's the point? They're not a patient, right? And they have to be sane or rational because we live in an irrational world. Markets are irrational. So if they're not rational, we really just can't work together. So, I say if people can meet those 4 criteria, right, we can work with them in some fashion. So I think, again, I'm a big believer in professional advice, whether it's medical, financial, health, you name it, right? So I think the sooner you engage, probably the better. But your best bet is to, I'll give you an example. So I got referred a client's daughter's cousin. I don't really remember. She just had some general questions, right? She worked for Netflix and had all these stock options. There was no opportunity for us to work with her, right? But like she was making good money and she just wanted to know what to do with it, right? So I do think there are those of us out there where you just can pick their brain, and they maybe do it as a lost leader so that at some point maybe you can be a client, right? So again, I think the sooner the better to get you on the right track.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. The next question looks at employee-sponsored retirement plans. So besides employee-sponsored retirement plans like the 401k, are there other individual options we should look into for long-term investing or retirement? The examples that this person gave was like mutual funds, ETFs, etc.
Well, I mean, always you're going to want to max out, your tax advantage plans first. So, for instance, if somebody is coming to us and they're saying, "Oh, I'm saving all this money, or I'm looking to save more," the first question we'd ask, well, are you maxing out your tax deferred plans, tax advantage plans, or whatever? And if they say no, it's like, well, why not, right? I mean, do that first. Take your tax deduction because you don't get a lot of them, right? So, I think after you've maxed out those, then it's maybe more advantageous to start saving after tax money. But again, I'll just draw a distinction here between someone working for Kaiser or a hospital or what have you, right? They will have access to maybe an employer sponsored 401k. Whereas if you're a solo practitioner, you're setting up your own retirement plan, which in a lot of ways, a lot of our clients, a lot of our physicians set up defined benefit plans, pension plans, if you will. And I mean, we have a plastic surgeon, Newport Beach, that just started in one of these types of plans. Obviously, he's a high earner. he puts away, gosh, I mean, off the top of my head, somewhere around $150,000, right? Tax deferred. Okay. Someone that just has a 401k plan through Kaiser. I know I'm just picking on Kaiser funny because, just as it serves as a good point of reference, right? Because it is one path, like a large established, medical company. So like that option isn't available for someone working at Morgan Stanley or Kaiser or right. But for someone running their own practice, right, it's a great way to save. And I think of that 150, maybe 10,000 of it is allocated to his employees, right? Because of his age, his income, he gets to really skew it for him. And again, it's a tax deduction. It's an expense for the business. So I really think, again, depending on which avenue you're going, whether that is solo practitioner or part of a larger medical group, that'll really tailor that. That's where someone like us can really help quarterback what should you be doing, how should you be doing it. The other thing I'll just say on that is we have a lot of physicians that seem to like, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but they work with the hospital as a W-2, but then they have a private practice as like they're a 1099 through their corporation, right? So what they'll do is they'll actually have their 401k through the hospital, but then they'll also have their own retirement plan through their corporation. So it's probably a more complicated question than they intended, but there's lots of different avenues for you guys to save in a tax advantaged way. I would take that opportunity first.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And just a quick reminder for the audience, if you could send us any questions that you would like Brian to address at the end, that would be wonderful. So next, the next question was, when would you recommend for us to start estate planning?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of those things, it depends on where you are in life. Estate planning is one of those things. I mean, it's, like, you guys are all cardiologists, right? So it's like, diet and exercise is important, right? Sometimes it's more urgent for others. And that's the same type of thing with estate planning. I mean, it's always important. It's just, for a lot of people, it's not urgent. And for those of us that have young kids, don't wait, right? I mean, and I'm even guilty of it, having a young kid. I mean, you should have a will, you should have guardianship, 100%. A lot of people don't, they wait. And then some basic things you really need to think about is a trust, right? As you start accumulating assets. For those of us that live in California, probate is not a fun process. So just get a basic living trust. I mean, better yet, go to an estate attorney, get the starter package, right? Get your will, get your trust, and get your POAs. I mean, you guys know this in the hospital setting. I mean, anytime you're there with someone, right, they ask where your agent is, or they give you a form right on the spot. It's like, really, is that where you want to be making those decisions? Oh, he's my agent. Like, no, it's like you want to be making those decisions proactively ahead of time. So again, if you're just graduating, you're single, like, you're just focused on you, probably not a priority. But if there's other people in your circle, spouses, children, certainly, I mean, start engaging in that process for sure.
Excellent points. The next one, we've kind of talked about it briefly in regards to individual solo practice, but this question is, what are the details involved with individual solo practice, and should it be an LLC?
Yeah, again, that's a good question for a tax professional attorney. I mean, clearly, the short answer is yes. I mean, it should be some sort of limited liability entity, whether that's an S Corp or an LLC. I probably prefer LLCs just because they're a little more flexible. But again, you'd really want a legal opinion on that. But yeah, I mean, liability matters for you guys, I presume, right? So you want to make sure your personal assets are protected from like the business assets. But the bottom line is all these corporate entities, right? It's all about protecting or isolating something to the inside. So keeping your personal money out of this protected entity is what's critical. But remember, they're all flow through. So any money that these S corps or LLCs make, they get taxed on your individual return. So, just understand that, if you have all this money in your corporation, you're going to get something like a K1, or depending on the corporation, but you're going to get it sent out to you and you're going to pay taxes on it. So the other thing that, I echo, you probably don't get a lot of training on this, but when money is in this entity, when money is in this corporation, at the end of the year, you're going to be taxed on it, whether you spend it or you don't, right? So just make sure that I shared this with Leanna, for those that are going into solo practice, your first call should be to a CPA, because again, they're going to be the ones that are, really helping you to make sure you don't get in trouble with the IRS, and can help kind of budgeting and help you understand, do I need to make quarterly estimates, right? Or do I just need to save a certain amount of all the money I make for taxes? Pretty complex stuff for people that are really just trying to help people, So again, very specific to that case, Megan, but certainly you are going to want to limit liability where you can.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you so much for that answer. So next, it says, when is the deadline to contribute to your Roth IRA as you finish fellowship and start your attending job? Would it be at the end of that academic year or before that? And are there any income restrictions and contribution limits to your Roth IRA?
Yes. So the limit is, the deadline is tax filing. So that has just passed. And then the amount, I was actually just looking here. Yeah, so the deadline is April 15th or whatever day they, moved April 18th or whatever this year. And the amount this year was $6,000. So it's not, again, Roth IRAs are great when you're young, right? It's all money that's tax deferred and growing tax free. But remember, you're not getting a deduction for it. So you have to, again, kind of weigh those pros and cons of, do I need the deduction or can I forego it and get this tax-free growth? For a lot of our physicians, I love that this particular person is thinking about saving. For a lot of our physicians, the 6,000 isn't really moving the needle enough. So that's where they go kind of maybe to a Roth 401k or some other vehicle that lets them save more.
Excellent. The next question is kind of something we've addressed as well, but kind of going into it in a little bit more detail. After student debt is paid off, what is a good way to budget how much money to put in a high interest savings account, perhaps saving for a down payment on a house or for mortgage versus investing in stocks? What are the things to think about when deciding what is best for you and your family?
Sorry, I had to take out my headphones there. So I'm looking here. So basically after the student debt's paid off, how are you budgeting, on where to put your money effectively?
Exactly. Yeah. Versus like stocks versus, mortgage and.
Yeah. So that's where I would go. Again, going back to that whole, hierarchy of, okay, so your debt's paid off, which is great. Congratulations. You got your savings account dialed in at 6 to 12 months of your living expenses. Anything over and above that, it's all about growing your net worth, right? So I would say, okay, cash account covered, your checking account covered, savings accounts covered, and now you're ready to start, and your debt's paid off. So build your net worth. Okay, so am I maxing out my retirement plans? Yes. Okay, great. Good job. Okay, so now you can start saving after tax. All right, or paying off your mortgage. Again, if it's me, I have a very low mortgage rate, so I'm not really excited to pay it off. Right. So I'd much rather, put money into any type of investment that is outpacing the rate that I'm borrowing money from, right? But again, if you're very risk averse and you don't like the debt, then you can pay off the mortgage. Because again, that's building your net worth, right? The way that I would think about it for the person that's asking that question is, again, I'm just going to reiterate, I know it's redundant. Okay, I have my checking account covered, my savings account, my retirement plan's maxed out, my debt's paid off. Okay, so if I want to pay down my mortgage, right, I'm ready to do that. What's your mortgage rate? Oh, 4%, whatever. Okay, well, that's fine. Just know you're locking in a 4% rate of return on that money. Okay. I mean, so if you're okay with that, then, great. Historically, whether you're owning, real estate or stocks or whatever, right? Generally over time, if you're patient, you're going to outpace that. But again, there's a different risk profile there. If you're not comfortable with the risk, then maybe paying off the mortgage is a good option. But remember, by paying off the mortgage, right, effectively what you're doing, you're increasing net worth, but you're doing it with non-working assets, right? So that gets back to that whole thing of saying, okay, well, a lot of people, when they buy their first house, they put 20% down, right? Well, remember, that's a big chunk of money that you're just putting into the non-working asset bucket. So now you need to really spend some time to building up the working asset bucket. So again, I guess what I would say, Megan, the other thing I would say to shape that question is pay attention to the ratios, right? And just don't put everything into the dirt you're living in, because it's never going to cut you a paycheck.
Well said. Perfect. And we have a question from the audience. So thoughts on refinancing student loans versus waiting for possible forgiveness?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's funny. So, my wife has a small amount. I mean, I would tell you guys, but you'd say like, that's absurd. That's not even debt. But it's like, she has like a small amount, and it's like, I'm just sitting here thinking like, it almost keeps me kind of engaged to see what they're doing with the student loans. You know what I mean? Because it's like they keep extending the the COVID relief payment thing. So she hasn't made a payment on them in like 2 years or whatever. In my opinion, I think your guys' loans will be the last to be forgiven. Unfortunately, I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I think, our government isn't always logical, but certainly a logical thing that they might do is look at income as part of that, or ability to pay back. So if it's me, I'm probably taking the prudent steps, consolidating, refinancing, etc. And then if they forgive them, great. But I just, I don't have a whole lot of faith that the cardiologists of America will be the first to have their debt forgiven, even if they should. I mean, I'm just,
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Brian. We really appreciate your time on this. And this is very, I think we have one last minute question. I think we have also time for one last minute question if you're good with that, Brian. Param was asking, can you explain how much it costs to speak/work with a financial planner, how you come to trust one, given obviously they have a vested interest in selling products?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, so you'll all get your invoice tonight, and then you'll know how much it costs to speak with us. But no, I mean, on a serious note, like I gave that example of someone, a friend of a friend who worked at Netflix. I mean, clearly we don't get paid like an attorney, like a CPA. I mean, I don't have a clock where we invoice people. But I mean, how we get paid is to manage client assets. So I think, you want to find someone that, obviously you trust, you have rapport with. I mean, I've always been very clear, with our clients, like we have to like each other, right? So if you like each other, and same thing with my doctor, right? It's like, I want to like my doctor, right? That's the way that we get paid. I mean, in terms of if someone has an interest or a vested interest to sell their products, again, I mean, objectively, I would say they're not the right person, right? So there's a lot of people that call themselves financial planners, and that's not to say they don't do financial planning. I don't know, but if you're, talking with someone at like, I don't want to pick on any company, XYZ insurance company that is a financial planner, right? Well, clearly, yeah, there's gonna be a conflict of interest there, right? One of the things I like about Morgan Stanley, or I used to work at Merrill Lynch, I don't get paid any different, whether we're buying X stock, Z stock, X fund, Y fund, right? It's, we generally engage as fiduciaries with our clients. So I don't get paid any differently if I sell a specific product. And I think truly, that's the way that you get unbiased advice. And again, one of the things I love about my job is I get to work with a lot of doctors. So one of the things that I always do when I have a question about a family member is I call them, right? Because they don't have a horse in the race. And I think that's really from what you got to look for is someone that can be objective, and not incentivized to sell something that they get, an insurance planner that gets extra pay for selling an insurance product, right? So.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Brian. I think we've reached the end of our session here. Thank you again for your time, Brian, and thank you for California ACC for allowing us to put up the session and provide this for all our current audience members, as well as in the future when we post it to the California ACC website. So as a reminder, we will be posting it to California ACC website, and it will be available as well. Additionally, if you do have any further questions, either, once that's been recorded and posted on the website, we'd be more than happy to pass it along to Brian once that's been done. But thank you again, and thank you all for joining. I hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great night.